All right. So, Job. Last week we talked about our questions. You know, we kind of looked through the whole purpose of the book and the principles. God, we talked about the triangle that one of the scholars had come up with. God's justice being at the top, that God is just. And then we have Job's righteousness down here on this corner. And over here we have the principle of how a lot of times we think God should judge the universe. That's with righteous judgment. And so we're finding out that the three don't always mix, because we know God is just. The friends come along and they say, well, it's obvious, Job, that God is just, so it's obvious to us that you are not right. You have sinned somehow, obviously. So then you come down, and if you look at the world from the friend's standpoint, they're like, or at Job's standpoint, Job knows that he is righteous, and he figures that God, He does the world by just recompense. He gives people what they get for what they deserve. And so Job's conundrum ends up and says, well, how is God just? And God looks down and says, well, he says here in 1 and 2, he says, Job is righteous. I am just. So where does that leave us? That leaves us to put on trial the just recompense that we figure that God should judge the universe over. And we talked about karma last week and how the world kind of looks at things like, well, there's this big store bank, and Ryan talked about that from the back. He said, that, yeah, there is this, if you plant a seed of wheat, what are you going to get? Wheat out of the ground, right? So there is this principle of you will reap what you sow, but not always. Not every time. And we talked about how Proverbs was this list of things that says, if you do this, things will go well. If you do right, things will go well. If you raise your children in the way they should go, we talked about that example. If when they grow up, they will not depart from that. Is that true? Well, generally.
Sometimes, like you said, generally. Sometimes we might not live to see it.
Well, and that's true too, but sometimes it doesn't. You know, sometimes they go out on their own and make their own decisions and decide not to follow God. So we are visiting this, and we talked about lying. We talked about that. You know, because we visited last week a sense, I'm catching some who weren't here last week up to date, but we visited last week the principle of lying. So lying is wrong. But then we looked back at Rahab and we said, we saw Rahab blatantly lie to save the lives of the spies that had came to her town. And she ended up in the lineage of Jesus. The Bible never rebukes her on that fact. It never goes back and says, well, you know, Rahab shouldn't have done that, but God kind of overlooked that, you know, because it was a better thing. And so we have this constant wrestling match where we know what is right, we know what is good, but sometimes we have a bigger picture. And we talked about that from a kid's standpoint. We're like, don't lie. From an adult standpoint, we're like, oh, that's hard. How, you know, like we said, we lie to save lives. So many times in the Holocaust, there were people who hid the Jews and lied about it to save lives. So were they wrong in lying? Or were they right to save lives? So those are the kinds of things that we wrestle with that gives us a hint into God's wisdom. Because we know that God has a much greater outlook. Marty?
I was going to say that Christ made a really great example on that with the Pharisees on the healing on the Sabbath. What's better?
Right. That's exactly right. Good point. So we see Jesus looking back at these principles. So, if God is just, does that mean that He must run the world or the universe with just recompensation? Well, that's what this book is visiting. So, we started last week looking at the book, and we read chapter 1, some of it, and we see the opposer show up. So this is, many translate this Satan, and this is, they capitalize Satan, but this is simply the word, the one who opposes. Now, I'm not saying it is, and I'm not saying it's not. What I'm saying is what the translation states is this is in the, and I don't want to get lost in, is this how heaven works? You know, there's a weekly council meeting of the sons of God, and they're all giving their opinion, and that is not what this book is about. It's not about how heaven works. This book is about a thought experiment of why righteous people suffer, and is it good policy to always give good for good? Because we talked about Satan's point last week that said, or the accuser, we talked about the accuser saying, or the opposer saying, is this not why he's good? And we see that. I've talked several times about I heard an argument that said, if you have to be told by God to be nice to me, what kind of person does that really make you? So if we're only nice because we get reward from God, or we're only good because God rewards us, or if we're only good to people because we get good in the long run, is that not the point that the accuser or the opposer is saying here? Marty?
I was going to go along that line too, that if there was no reward for evil, and if it was only for good, then everybody would be good just for the physical rewards, not because they love God. And then you also have to look that Christians themselves were persecuted. We know the hardship is there for those that do good.
Well, but we also understand that, so with good versus evil, if you do good, you're supposed to get good. If you do evil, you're supposed to get evil. But what if not? What happens when we don't?
How many times do you see people that are doing evil that are rewarded and seem like they're doing better than
Right.
those that are trying to do good?
So the opposer shows up and says that he calls to question. And so this word, the Satan, the Satan, is simply meaning the one who opposes. Actually, God raises up Satans against Solomon in opposition to him. 1 Kings 11. The angel of the Lord is a Satan because he stands in the middle of the road and opposes, it's the exact same word, he opposes Balaam in what Balaam is going to do. Remember that story Ryan went through? And so it's the same wording there. So it is simply the one who is giving an opposing view. And like we said, it's kind of a question we need to ask. It's a question that we need to ask in our hearts. Why do we do good? See, the opposer is there with a different view. He questions God's policy about rewarding righteousness for good behavior. Doesn't that corrupt our motives? Could it corrupt our motives? If we receive good for good and we know that that's what's coming, could that not be the reason we do things?
Josh, where's the difference somebody that has that motive to be good and somebody that's just evil all the time, that don't do no good?
Right.
Are they built that way?
Well, I think it's all, the old saying, life's full of choices. I think that a lot of that comes down to that. But, it does seem like people they are prone to certain things, but they can't overcome them.
I think when you look at that argument about well, if your God has to tell you to be nice, I mean, that sets the standard. The Bible or God sets the standard, that moral code. If you see people who are raised with a different standard, then, I mean, it's not that somebody's telling you to do good, it's that's the standard.
Right.
You have rules in your household. I work with kids who have rules in their household that are expected to act a certain way, come in and they are behaved, but the ones who raising themselves and
Right.
don't have a standard, they come in fighting and saying things and doing things, and to them it's okay, because that's what their standard is.
And it does get into, I'll never forget one of my inmates came to me one morning and he said, Mr. Leedy, I bet your mom took you to Sunday school when you were a kid, weren't you? Or didn't she? I said, yes, sir. He said, when I was 5, my mom would take me to steal because she knew I wouldn't get in trouble. And she knew that I couldn't go to jail. He said, so I had a little different upbringing. And we do see that, and generational sin and things like that. Rita?
On Kristen's point, I had a social worker down in Tazewell till because we had, you always get one person always wanting help, Will you pay this, will you pay that? And he told me, he said, they have learned this. They've watched it all their life.
Learned behavior.
He said it's hard for them to get out of that cycle.
And it is hard, and that's why so many times when we see an abused child break a cycle and not become an abuser, it's such Crystal has gone through this her entire life. There has been just a few that have broken the cycle and have done different. And one of my favorite things that I've ever heard was, and I've said it before to you all, but you've got 2 children of an alcoholic. And one grows up and says, not alcoholic, never drank a drop in their life. And they say, well, what'd you expect? I grew up as an alcoholic's child. Look at the suffering and look at the things that I watched. And then you have the other that grows up and becomes an alcoholic and says, well, what'd you expect me to turn out like? My father was an alcoholic. He raised me like that. I saw that my entire life. It's in my genetics. And so you have 2 opposing views in the same place. So it's just, and this is part of that wisdom, this wild world that we're going to talk about at the end that's so beautiful but dangerous. Marty, what were you going to say?
I wanted to hit on the pure evil part of it, because this is something that come out, the YouTube video that they've got this guy that's on trial for some horrific crimes and just absolutely no remorse. The judge is trying to offer leniency. He wants no part of it. So, you look at something like that, yes, there is pure evil in the world as well.
I don't know how that works. That's not what this book is looking at, though.
True, but
So let's stay on, because we're going to run out of time quick. So if our motives are corrupted by good being rewarded for good, then wouldn't that make us unrighteous? So I just wanted to hit that. We only serve God to get the reward. That's what becomes the question. We tend to question why righteous people suffer. That's what we want to say. Well, why do good people suffer? But the opposer flips that up on its end and says, well, why should righteous people prosper at all? That's really a good question. Because if we really, right, so none of us are truly righteous, right? We all have our good, we all have our bad. Why should anyone prosper? Why should good come to anyone? If that's the case, if we're only rewarded if we only act good because we are good, why should we get any good out of life? So how can you truly know unless you take it all away? That's what the opposer comes in and says. Let's see what happens. So chapter 1 ends, we read through that last week, and Job passes the test, doesn't he? And it says at the end of the chapter, and then this, Job does not sin. And so Job is righteous again. Job is proven righteous. And if the story ends, then Job's passed, right? And chapter 2 comes. So let's go there. And on another day, let's skip through that because it's basically the same thing. God presents him and he goes on to say in verse 4, skin for skin, Satan replied, man will give all for his own, if for his own life, but now stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bone, and he will surely curse your face. Very well, but you must spare his life. So he goes on, the wife says, curse God and die. You are foolish, he tells her, and in this Job did not sin in what he said. And the story ends again, and if this were the end, Job didn't sin. And I'm not, in the end, God ends up telling him in 40, whatever, one of the ends of the chapter actually in the last chapter in 42, he gets Job to actually sacrifice for the friends that God's angry with because of Job's righteousness. So even in Job, so Ron, when he did this lesson, he talked about Job's poem in chapter 3, where he curses his existence. I curse the day that I have ever been born. And this starts chapter 3 because we find out that this is a lot deeper. Job comes into this place and he's hurting. He's lost his family. He's lost his body. He's miserable. And he tells his wife, well, should we only receive good from God? And that's great, right? But yeah, Job, get it. But then chapter 3 opens up and we have a whole different outlook. And Job is miserable and he just curses the day he was ever born. And isn't this showing the raw emotion that we go through when bad things happen? One moment we're like, it's okay, God. I understand. I think I'm figuring this out. I don't know what's going on here. I don't know why you've done what you've done, but I'm okay with it. And in the next moment, you're like, I'm not okay with this. And Job goes through here in places and he's talking about, and the friends, here come those friends. They come and they sit with him. 7 days, and nobody says a word. 7 days, and then Job opens up and curses the day he was born. Raw emotion in terrible times, and we've all been there. When we have lost someone, when we have come to a trial, when the tests come back positive for whatever, or the blood work's not right, and the emotions start turning and you're like, okay, one moment you're like, I'm okay with this. This is going to be okay. And in the next moment you're caught up in the raw emotion of, why, God? Why is this happening to me? And so your friends come and sit and they sometimes say good things, sometimes not. Eliphaz shows up, and these represent, so if you look at this like a thought experiment, these represent the basic outlook of the times, basically. You're looking at what they come in and they say, well, I hear you, you're righteous, okay, but let's see, so let's get into some of that. Eliphaz, says, chapter 4, verse 7, he says, "Consider now, who being innocent has ever perished? Where were the upright ever destroyed? As I have observed, those who plow evil and those who sow trouble reap it." Wink, wink. Job, Job. Sounds to me like Job, maybe you're getting what you deserved. I'm not saying it, but I'm saying it. You know what I mean? At the breath of God they perish. At the blast of His anger they are no more. Shoo! Eliphaz, getting it in on Job. Chapter 8. We'll turn over there to Bildad. 4. When your children sinned against him, Job, he gave them over to their sin. But if you will seek God earnestly and plead with the Almighty, if you are pure and upright, even now He will rouse Himself on your behalf and restore you to your prosperous state. Job, we've got to have an intervention. The 3 friends show up and say, you know, we hear what you're saying about your righteousness and all. Let's talk. It's pretty obvious to me that God gives what's deserved. And you say you're righteous. Look at your kids. You know, they were out having a party or whatever, and God gave them what for. Looks like you're just getting part of it too, old Job, old buddy. Just repent and God will restore all these things to you. So, why did God have good gifts, or why did Job have good gifts to begin with? Right? So that now we build the story. Why was Job prosperous? Was it because he was good? They're saying if you're good again, you'll be restored again. And at the end of the book, we're going to look and God's going to restore him. So is Bildad right? Let's keep going. Job maintains his innocence. Chapter 16. We're running out of time. We may have to do one more week on this. We'll see. Job maintains his innocence. Chapter 16. My face is red with weeping. Dark shadows ring my eyes. Yet my hands have been free from violence, and my prayer is pure. Earth, do not cover my blood. May my cry never be laid to rest. Even now, my witness is in heaven. So, in Genesis, Job is calling back to whose blood cried out from the earth? Abel's. To be made right. And Job is calling God back to that moment. Earth, do not cover up my blood. You make sure that they know that I'm righteous. Don't you cover this up. 16:16. Let's see, where else? Chapter 9. Let's turn back to chapter 9. Verse 24. Let's see. Let me find my spot here. Although I am blameless, let's go back to 21. I have no concern for myself. I despise my own life. It is all the same. That is why I say, He, God, destroys both the blameless and the wicked. When a scourge brings sudden death, He mocks the despair of the innocent. When a land falls into the hands of the wicked, He blindfolds its judges. If not He, then who is it? Whew! Getting bold, ain't we? We're calling God out. we're saying, God, it's pretty obvious to me that you are not just. These raw emotions running through Job. And if you will admit in your times of sadness and despair, have you thought those things? God, what did I do? Have I not served you? Have I not been there? Have I not done this? Have I not? Why? Are you just? Are you really just? Whew. Man. And here are these friends, and they ain't helping. So that chapter 23 said, if I knew where to go to be able to talk to God, I would lay this out and I would say, here I am, God, I am innocent. And I would let God speak. If I could get in a room with God and I could say, this is my side of the story, you tell me yours, then maybe we could come to a place that I could understand. So then we're introduced to the young man Butch talked about. He called him last week when we were talking in downstairs. The young man, Elihu. Now his point is a little bit different. It says, okay, the two friends that we heard from, the cycle breaks down. It was friend Job, and then the third friend we never heard from. But Elihu shows up, and it seems he's been there the whole time because he's heard all of these arguments. And he's long-winded. 6 chapters worth of Elihu. He goes on and on and on and on. He talks the whole first chapter about how he's going to speak. And we're like, okay, we get the point. You're going to speak. And so he does. And he goes on to say, well, you all don't have a nuanced approach to this. He says, we'll see. So 33, let's look at that. Let's go up through here a little bit. I'm getting panicked because we're going to run out of time. 33 says, 12 through 18, this is Elihu. But I tell you that you are not right, for God is greater than any mortal. Why do you complain to Him? For He responds in no one's words. For God does speak, now one way, now another, though no one perceives it. In a dream or a vision of the night, when deep sleep falls as they slumber, He may speak in their ears and terrify them with warnings and turn them from wrongdoings and keep them from pride, to preserve them from the pit and the lives from perishing by the sword. So he says, y'all aren't looking at this right. God is doing this to Job to keep him from sinning in the future. He is building Job's character so he does different later. And he goes on, he talks about a deathbed confession next that will change a man, and then God will heal him, and now he's not. So is that true? Is that why God is doing this? Well, no. Because He's still pulling it to a reason. He's still saying, this is why God is doing what He is doing, Job. And sometimes we don't understand that. Sometimes it's not for us to know. And this brings us to the middle. Ron, you may have to go wiggle that mouse and get that re-going again, because I think that has... You got to turn it back on, probably. Oh, probably. So we'll give that a second. Chapter 28. You're going to be completely shocked that Job is a chiasm. The beginning, we have the God looking, we start out and we're talking about how Job is blessed. Then the next thing we know, we're talking about how... So I'll have to, if you can see some of this, let me go up. Job's fortunes and suffering. At the end of the book we have... Oh, come on, please. Oh. Run the mouse down just a little bit, Ron. Give me some more. I had these printed up. Should have.
Job's fortunes.
Yeah, Job's fortunes. So then, let me zoom it out just a little bit maybe. Scroll down just a little bit. Nope, other way. Job's, yeah, let me zoom down just a little bit more. Try one more time. Roll it up.
As far as
Bring it, yeah. So Job's fortunes will start, it starts with Job's fortune, it ends with Job's fortunes. Job's friends, then we have at the end, Job's friends are humiliated. Scroll down just a little bit. Let me see number 3. Job's cursed the day he was born. Then we have the words of Job, 22. And so you see all of this brings us to the center of the book, which is 28. 28, 1 through 28. And somewhere in the middle of 28, we have these words. Where then does wisdom come from? So we have this book, this interlude, and it talks about, so we have Job speaking on both sides of this, so now we're finding, where does wisdom come from? Chukmah, as the Hebrew says it. Where is wisdom? Proverbs talks about it, right? Things work out. If you do good, things work out. Then Ecclesiastes comes along and the cynic says, well, yeah, things work out, but sometimes it don't. But in the end, it all work out. Then you have the book of Job that highlights the suffering instead of highlighting the good. Where can wisdom be found? In the midst of suffering, where is wisdom? Only God has wisdom, this chapter says. We cannot fathom it. It talks about mining for it. We go in what other animal goes and digs in the earth to find a gem? We go and it talks about this. We're going to try to find these gems. But where is wisdom? We can't find it. We don't know where it's at. We look, we search, we go high and low, we can't find it. But God has it. God knows why He's done what He's done. And I think about the blind man that Jesus comes across and the disciples say, "Who sinned? Who sinned, Jesus? It's this blind man, being blind his whole life. Is it his fault or is it his mom and dad's?" And Jesus said, this man is blind for this moment. Man, I love that. That is one of my favorite stories of the New Testament, because here's this man blind from birth, and he has no idea why he's been blind from birth. He has suffered with blindness his entire life for one moment with Jesus. And everybody around him is looking at him saying, his parents must have done something really bad. He must have done something really bad, or God knew he was going to do something really bad, and He stopped him by making him blind. Isn't that what we've heard in this story of Job? That's what the friends have said. And here are the disciples 1,000 years later, and they're saying the same things. The men who grew up hearing the story of Job saying the same things. And they hadn't learned the lesson. Only God has wisdom. God's chukmah, God's wisdom, it brings the chaos into check. but we can't understand it. God brings order to chaos in creation. And I want you to understand this knowledge, this wisdom that Job's searching for. I mean, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, without God, that was deadly to them. And here's Job searching for the reason of why. He's reaching out and he wants to pluck it, and God says, you can't find it. So, we end with the fear of the Lord is wisdom. Isn't that what it's all about? So Job finally gets his wish. God speaks. He starts with Job, and he gives Job this virtual tour of the universe, right? So he takes him on the tour. Man, we're going to run out of time. My problem is I'm too long for today, and probably too short for a single lesson next week. But I want to get to the point of Job's getting his wish here. He speaks with God. Job starts with God on this virtual tour of the universe. And he starts with the macro. Where were you when I did all this? And he says, where were you when this all happened? And then he says, can you explain to me the donkey in the field? This wild donkey. And he takes him on a tour of a wild donkey. And that's just random, isn't it? And isn't that the point of it? And he talks about a valley that is watered that no man will ever see. And God takes pleasure in that. Do you know right now, somewhere in this universe is the most beautiful, spectacular sunset in a sun that we have never witnessed, in a world that we have never seen, that was created for God, for His purpose, for Him to enjoy. We'll never see it. We'll never understand it. We didn't understand that an atom was, until we could see it, right? And so we're constantly on this journey with God, and we always figure out how stupid we've been. So he starts with the macro, the big. He ends with the micro. Where were you when the birth of the goat, or what he says that in whatever. God is delighting in His creation. And when he talks about Leviathan, he goes on and on about this Leviathan. Did you not see this? His limbs are huge. And he goes on and on about this thing that he created that's wild and dangerous and beautiful. So Job declares, after all this, Job declares God is right. In 42, 1 through 6, he declares his change of heart. God condemns the friends, and Job actually has to sacrifice on their behalf. God declares Job righteous. He says, his righteousness is what's given you, He's going to be able to restore you all, and Job is restored. So, Job gets everything back, right? Did he deserve it? No, because that's the point of the story. He didn't have it to begin with because he deserved it. He didn't work his way through his problems and get it all restored because he deserved it. It was a gift from God all along. And when we finally get to the point where we realize every moment is a gift that can be taken away in a moment, we will learn to appreciate the right now. And when bad things happen, we'll say, God, thank you for what I had. Thank you for what I have. And thank you for what you will give me. Any thoughts on that? We just got a couple minutes here. All right, I rushed through that. I appreciate you all so much. Thank you.